Greg Daniels leaned back in his first-class seat, sipping champagne as the plane ascended into the sky, with a sense of unease gnawing at him. Greg scanned the cabin, feeling the emptiness of the luxurious setting. Despite the private cabin, personal service, and the comfort he'd grown accustomed to, the truth was that Greg was far from content. He had everything: money, power, success, but he felt disconnected from it all. Across the aisle, Greg noticed the familiar figure of Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. He had admired him from a distance for years, but it wasn't admiration he felt at this moment. Instead, it was something darker: resentment. How had Dwayne done it? Greg thought. How had he become the face of the world's biggest movies and earned the adoration of millions just by smiling and lifting weights? Greg's thoughts grew more bitter. I've built a real empire, not a facade. I've worked day and night to create something that lasts, he thought, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. It bothered him that someone like Dwayne, seemingly handed success on a silver platter, could be admired so much. Unable to keep his frustrations bottled up, Greg leaned toward the businessman seated next to him and muttered in a low voice, "You know, it's frustrating. The guy has everything, but what does he actually do? He doesn't have to work hard at anything. He just plays pretend for a living." The businessman, who had been reading a magazine, glanced up for a brief moment but said nothing. Greg continued, speaking louder now, convinced that his frustration needed to be shared. People love him because he's got muscles and a pretty face. But what about people who've actually had to struggle, who've had to put in the work to build something meaningful? Greg's voice was thick with disdain as he glanced over at Dwayne. He's just a product of Hollywood, all smoke and mirrors. He's got no real substance. The words hung in the air, but just as Greg thought the conversation would die down, he saw Dwayne stand up from his seat. Greg felt his heart skip a beat as Dwayne, who had been chatting with fellow passengers, now made his way down the aisle toward him. The entire atmosphere in the cabin seemed to shift. Dwayne's presence was undeniable, and the people around him hushed their voices. His sheer physicality, combined with an aura of easy confidence, commanded attention. Greg's stomach sank. This isn't happening, he thought. He heard me. Dwayne's piercing gaze locked onto Greg's, and with no hesitation, Dwayne approached him. "Is there a problem, brother?" he asked, his deep voice warm but firm. The calmness in his tone made Greg's stomach twist even further. Greg froze, his bravado faltering. No problem," he stammered, trying to backtrack, but Dwayne didn't seem to be in a hurry. His towering frame loomed over Greg, and the weight of his words struck Greg like a hammer. "I heard what you said," Dwayne said softly, but there was no mistaking the power behind his words. "About me. About what you think I've achieved. So, let's clear something up. You think it's all just a facade, huh?" Greg swallowed hard. He had expected Dwayne to be defensive, maybe even confrontational, but Dwayne's calm demeanor was disarming. It made Greg feel more uncomfortable than he cared to admit. "I mean, I just don't understand how people idolize someone like you," Greg said, trying to regain his composure. "You've never had to work for anything. You just show up, flex a few muscles, and people go wild." Dwayne's expression remained neutral, but there was a quiet intensity in his eyes. "You think it's all muscles and movies, huh? You think fame comes easy?" Dwayne paused, letting the question hang in the air. "Let me tell you something, Greg. I didn't get here by luck. Nothing came easy." Greg's chest tightened. He wasn't sure where this was going, but Dwayne wasn't the angry celebrity he had anticipated. He wasn't lashing out. Instead, Dwayne was offering something that felt like a reality check. "I had to fight, every day. Not just for fame, but for respect, for credibility. I wasn't born with the perfect body Hollywood wanted, and I wasn't the most likely guy to be cast in major films. I've been rejected more times than I can count," Dwayne continued, his voice low but powerful. "And every time I was told no, I had to prove them wrong." Greg couldn't believe what he was hearing. The Rock, the man who had everything, was telling him about rejection, struggle? Greg couldn't help but feel a shift in his perspective. He had always assumed that Dwayne had been handed his success, that he had been elevated by the entertainment industry without having to do the hard work Greg had put in to build his empire. "I had to build myself up, Greg," Dwayne said, leaning in slightly, his words resonating deeply. "And I don't just mean my body, I mean my mind, my character. Because real success isn't just about fame. It's about how you carry yourself. It's about how you treat the people around you. It's about knowing that every success comes with sacrifice." Greg found himself speechless. The bitterness that had fueled his earlier words began to dissipate, replaced by an uncomfortable realization. Dwayne wasn't the one who needed to change. Greg was. Fame doesn't define me, Dwayne continued, his tone firm. I define it. I worked hard to earn the right to be where I am. And it hasn't been easy. There's always been a target on my back, people waiting for me to fail. But what's kept me going is not the fame or the money. It's the people I've inspired along the way. It's knowing that I've made a real impact. Greg's heart raced as Dwayne's words began to pierce through his defenses. The bitterness he had carried for years, blaming others for his own shortcomings, started to feel misplaced. For the first time, he wondered if maybe the frustration he had felt toward Dwayne was just a reflection of his own dissatisfaction with his life. Greg's voice faltered, the words he had wanted to say earlier now feeling inadequate. He cleared his throat, trying again. I had no idea. Dwayne nodded, a warm smile spreading across his face. It's all right, brother. We all get caught up in our own lives, but it's never too late to see things differently. Sometimes you just need someone to remind you of what really matters. Greg sat there, utterly humbled, as Dwayne continued speaking. It's about the journey, Greg. Life is not a sprint. It's a marathon. Every setback, every failure, every rejection, they're not the end. They're just steps. You keep moving forward, no matter how tough it gets. That's how you build something that lasts. Greg's mind was reeling now. The arrogance that had once colored his thoughts about success, his belief that only certain paths were worth following, was crumbling before him. Dwayne wasn't just a celebrity or a rich man. He was a symbol of perseverance, of someone who had risen above the odds and forged his own path, not out of privilege, but out of relentless determination. You know, Greg said after a long pause, I've spent my entire life thinking that success is all about what you can get, about the rewards. I never thought about the sacrifices or how much it takes to make a real difference. Dwayne's eyes softened, and he clapped Greg on the shoulder with a lighthearted chuckle. Exactly. It's not about what you get, it's about what you give. And more importantly, it's about the people you impact along the way. You never know how your story will touch someone else's life. Maybe that's the most powerful part of all. Greg stood up slowly, the weight of the conversation settling in. His heart no longer felt burdened with jealousy or resentment. Instead, he felt a quiet resolve. I think I've been looking at things the wrong way. Dwayne grinned. Don't worry about it, man. We all do. The trick is to recognize it and do better. I have no doubt you will. As the plane began its descent, the two men exchanged a few more words, and Greg couldn't shake the sense of gratitude that had settled in his chest. By the time they landed, the flight had transformed from a chance encounter into something much more. An eye-opening experience that would stay with Greg for the rest of his life. Walking off the plane, Greg had a renewed sense of purpose. Success, he now realized, was about much more than money, fame, or power. It was about the person you became along the way, the mark you left on the world. And in that moment, he was determined to begin making his mark differently.